Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, I'm here with Kurt Fredrickson and Cameron Lee, who are both on the faculty of Fuller Theological Seminary. Hi Kurt, hi Cameron, how are you doing?
Hey, hi,
Great.
Markus.
Hey, I'm really glad to to have you here. And why don't we just kind of introduce yourselves? Kurt, why don't you go ahead and begin?
Sure. I've been at Fuller for almost 18 years, and I'm in charge of the Doctor of Ministry program and the Doctor of Global Leadership program. Two great degrees, fantastic students and faculty and staff that I get to work with. Prior to being at Fuller, I was pastor of the Evangelical Covenant Church in Simi Valley for 24 years, and 18 of those years as senior pastor. So I've had two great career paths.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And Cameron, introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, Kurt didn't mention the fact that we actually went to high school together, even though we didn't know each other at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just,
in the same church.
Yeah, the same church. We weren't there. I don't know if we were there at the time, but because I became a Christian in college rather than in high school. But it depends on whether or not you were still there. Kurt's, of course, a lot older than I am, but we won't go into that.
That's the thing. Yeah.
That's right. I've been at Fuller actually for
That's awesome.
30, going on 35 years now. I came as a student in 1980, joined the faculty in 86, and have been teaching in the marriage and family program since then. When they were back in what was then the School of Theology, moved over to the School of Psychology, and so forth. So my students are primarily training to be family therapists, and it is really just a joy. They are just the most terrific folks to work with and to see how they're trying to live into their vision of what it means for them to be a therapist and to minister through that.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation with both of you. I want to ask you guys a couple of quick little get to know you questions. And Cameron, I'll start with you. What job would you be terrible at?
How long have you got? There are, I think, a lot of things that I wouldn't do well. And actually, even what Kurt used to do as being a senior pastor, I don't think I would ever actually be able to do that. As interested and invested as I've been with clergy, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you the same thing. She used to say that she would make a terrific pastor's wife, but I wouldn't necessarily make a great pastor because of all of the other things that are involved in the administrative responsibilities and so forth. I would really not enjoy that.
Yeah. I hear you. That's my least favorite part too.
Right? Yeah.
Let me ask you, Cameron. Yeah. The second question is, what would a mirror opposite of yourself be like?
If I try to think of somebody to be the mirror opposite of me, it would be sort of the humorless, hard-driving CEO, the person who is in charge of everything and needs to be in charge of everything and is sort of telling everybody else what they need to do. I would much rather be the background support guy than the one that's sort of leading the charge.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. Kurt, let me ask you those same two questions. What job would you be terrible at?
So anything that involves the use of my hands in any type of skilled labor. My grandfather was a carpenter, built houses in Oakland. My dad was a general contractor, built houses and apartment buildings, office buildings in the Bay Area. And my son can build anything. It skipped my generation. It is so bad that when I try to fix things around the home, when our kids were little, my wife would say, literally, "Come on, kids, let's go for a drive. Daddy is trying to fix something." And it's just best to have the kids out of the house when Daddy was trying to work on the plumbing, because it wasn't a good situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah, we've got a handyman that we call
Yeah,
when I need
I do
anything.
too. Yes, Josh is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Oh, good, 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 good. Here's the second question for you. What would a mirror opposite of yourself be like?
The first thing came to my mind is a football player. I
Oh,
don't have the physique. I'm not competitive in that sort of way, and I don't like getting hurt. And so
hmm,
I admire these people who get out on the field week after week and just get battered.
yeah,
Not for
yeah,
me.
yeah.
I'd rather watch it.
That's yeah, good. And what I love about talking to both of you guys, you mentioned it before we started recording. You guys have known each other for, well, you just, oh no, you said it already on the recording. You've known each other a long time, and so as we talk about what we're going to talk about today, the church after COVID. Yeah, I just look forward to learning from both of you, kind of what you've seen, and what you maybe even foresee. That might be saying too much. I don't know, but what you anticipate. So let's just kind of start. What do you think is the biggest lesson that the church has learned from this year of COVID? Cameron, why don't you start?
Well, even the question itself is interesting. I'm a little hesitant uh, to use that word church in the singular because some of what's been so painful
Mm,
about this past year is the way that COVID has divided the church and the way that people sort of default
yeah,
to various ways of talking about the situation that to me, and I'll probably end up tipping my hand a little bit in terms of my own ideological political leanings in that regard, but that to me sound a little bit too much like let's talk about our rights as opposed to let's talk about what we need
Mm.
to do in order to demonstrate what love looks like in our community. And that so to me it would be a matter of saying I don't know that the church has learned anything beyond the purely pragmatic stuff of how to do online and hybrid church. But there are lessons that I would hope
yeah,
that folks have learned through all of this. And again, particularly,
yeah,
what does it mean to really understand when we're in the midst of challenge and in fear and anxiety and suffering to love and to love well?
yeah, yeah. Kurt, what do you think? What have we learned anything?
Yeah, so a little different take. Middle of March of last year, the whole world turned upside down for everything about our lives, including church. Um,
Hmm.
what I think maybe the church learned, hopefully so far, is that when you're forced to adapt, you can adapt. And churches, all over the country, all over the world, stepped up and became more adaptable, and some did it really well and some had a hard time doing it, but everybody is kind of slugging through because they wanted to be the local people of God,
Hmm.
in
Yeah,
some way that they just didn't shut down. And I think we've also learned how important relationships are.
yeah,
All of us are just yearning to get out, to actually
yeah,
have contact with other people. And Cameron's right. Some of the this is my right kind of stuff is difficult to hear. Um, but at the best, we want to be in relationship with other people. We want to be
yeah,
around people. And I hope we don't forget that
yeah.
as we're going forward.
So, as I was listening to both of you share, kind of different perspectives, and yet I think, and let me know what you think about this. The connection between what each of you shared is willingness or unwillingness to adapt. Right? I mean, in some ways, every church has been forced to adapt, but
Right.
what I sense among some is a stubbornness, perhaps. Like, why should we have to change things? Why can't we just keep doing things the way you've done things? And how dare you tell me how I should do things here? So I don't know. Do you see some of that as well?
Yeah, well, and part of what I wonder about is I'm hoping to see some data on this once this is all over, assuming that it is all over at some point. as to
Mm-hmm.
who did and who didn't adapt. Uh, because I think Kurt's right in terms of wanting to point to the positive side of seeing how churches have adapted and flexed and sometimes did amazing, heroic things in a short space of time when everybody was forced to do things in a new way. But then I also worry that there are congregations who didn't have the resources and didn't have the expertise. And they have people who, because they want to be together, saying, well, the church down the street is the one that's still meeting. So we're going to go there. And I would suspect some of them aren't
Mm,
coming back.
yeah.
And with the smaller churches where you've got
Yeah.
pastors who are bivocational and are barely making it financially to begin with, I worry that some of those churches are actually going to close down. So I think some of the adaptation there is an incredibly positive thing. It's changed the way that people think about their constituency.
Mm-hmm.
It's making people have to think about it's not just what we do for the local community, but if we do go back to doing things the way that we did before, what about all these people that joined us online? How do we continue to serve them? Are
Mm-hmm.
they going to want
Yeah.
us to continue to serve them? But again, I suspect that's for the churches who did make that positive adaptation. I don't think that's everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, early on, I myself and I think a lot of other people went to church all around the world. Because we had the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity just to connect with different churches, different preachers, celebrity preachers, and to hear what was going on. That's not church for me.
Mm,
That
yeah.
that's interesting. That's good sermons. That's hearing good music, but there's something more about church that we miss there, and that is that community relational piece. And I'm afraid that people will get used to online church. It's convenience, where you eat breakfast and go to church and look at your cell phone all at the same time. That's not church going forward, but we might need to find ways to overcome that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so then let's think about going forward. What are some things that you think? Uh, Again, maybe I shouldn't use the singular, the church, but what are some things that churches may need to change, or how can they thrive moving forward? What are some thoughts on that? Kurt, why don't you start this one?
Yeah. So Cameron already mentioned the first one, and it's my biggest fear, which is that we're just going to go back to church the way it used to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Churches pre-COVID were over-programmed and under-discipled, and that's just the way that church has been, at least in North America. Um, Church influence has been on the decline. People are still spiritual and maybe aching even more spiritually, but affiliation with church, affiliation with religion, attending churches is on a steady decline. Uh, I'm afraid people are just going to say, well, okay, COVID is lifted. Let's just go back to the way. I would hope
Right.
that we would use this as an opportunity to reset, to
Yeah.
begin looking at churches, no matter what size of church we are, to be something different, to be a church
Yeah.
that is not so focused on programming and what's happening up on front on stage,
Yeah.
but is really working more seriously at discipling people, of seeing people being conformed to the image of Christ, which means we're going to have to do church differently.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope we get there. I'm
Yeah.
afraid we're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Cameron, what do you think in terms
Yeah, I
of
think a lot of that.
thriving in the future?
Yeah, a lot of that can be already said pre-COVID that this was the situation that we're in. So I think I'd want to frame it by way of saying that uh, if there is a gift to COVID, if I if I can say it that way,
Mm-hmm.
it's that those
Mhm.
kinds of crises, and we're talking about a shared crisis where it's not just a handful of people in the congregation are struggling with something, and okay, isn't that too bad? We pray for them, but everybody is struggling in some ways, and just some are struggling more than others. That kind of crisis tends to reveal the things that we take for granted. the things that, are important to us. And we didn't know that they were important to us because it's just part of our routine.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a
Right.
report that the Barna organization just put out, I think yesterday or today, something like that. And they were asking the question, so what is it that people miss about church, about being able to go and be there? And I think the number one thing that was mentioned is being able to take communion together. Being,
Yeah. Yeah.
being in the same room with other people to actually
Yeah.
share the bread and the cup, that,
Right.
that kind of liturgical
Right.
significance that we could just do on a Sunday and say, well, this is what we always do, and we just do it. I've had those situations
Right.
even in our own congregation when I was presiding over communion, where we'd have to have these conversations about why are we doing this, because people just go through the motions.
Yeah.
So along with the discipleship thing that
Right.
Kurt is talking about, I hope it wakes us back up to the things that are truly important.
Yeah. It's almost like COVID has been a mirror to kind of show us who we really are and what really matters to us. And, there's a part of me when I hear someone bragging about how many views they get on Facebook or
Right.
YouTube, I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, it's still the same thing, still the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I wonder is, what kinds of qualities do we need as leaders in order to move forward in a healthy way as we are still on the tail end of COVID, but then also moving out of COVID back into whatever normal will be like. What are some of the qualities that we need?
That depends on which
Kurt,
end
why don't you
of
start?
things you're talking about.
Oh, Cameron. Sorry. Go ahead, Cameron. Go ahead.
Yeah. We're going to edit this anyway, right? Kurt, go ahead.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll go. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, I came up with two qualities and a practice connected to each of those qualities. So the first one is really cultivating resilience, which is not a new thought, but I think it is so true. As the world has been disrupted, we've also been disrupted, and Apostle Paul, he talked about conflicts on the outside and fears within in 2 Corinthians. And I think that has been such our experience. Todd Bolzinger, talks about a failure of heart. And
Yeah.
I think we are just experiencing that. And so cultivating a sense of resilience, a mood of resilience, I think is so important for leaders going forward.
Yeah.
And the practice for me associated with that is developing a new sense of gratitude. We can't make ourselves joyful, but some people are talking about how gratitude is a gateway to joy. And if we actually became more grateful people, just looked at our lives and actually thought about the good things that are going on for us, and even turning that into a prayer, Father, I am so grateful for, that is going to begin, hopefully, to change us. And Cameron knows this better than I would. It even rewires our brains some way when it comes to practicing that sense of gratitude. That the second quality for me is learning to hold things loosely, trusting God in the midst of all this. And then the practice I connect with that is Sabbath. We need to be people who actually follow one of those 10 commandments and actually take Sabbath time away, which clergy are the absolute worst at. For me, practicing Sabbath, really having one day that is different from other days, first of all, reminds us that we're not necessary, which kind of counteracts to our tendency towards I'm so important, ego-driven, wanting to be a celebrity somehow. It reminds us that we're not in control, that God is, and works against our drive for power and control ourselves,
Yeah.
and also shows that we're not indestructible, that we're finite, we're limited, and we need to rest. We need to take care of our bodies. We need to exercise. We need to sleep. Those practices maybe change things for us over time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how when this all started, it was almost like an imposed Sabbath, like it was a forced Sabbath. And it was good, I think, for a lot of people. But I think there was also some resistance to that as well. And this like, we got to get back, right? Get back to normal. But yeah, I think you're totally right. Yeah. Cameron, any thoughts on what Kurt just shared, or your own thoughts on the kinds of qualities leaders need to develop moving forward?
Sure. I mean, when Kurt was talking about Sabbath, for example, one of the first things that popped into mind, and I think what both of you said, I agree with both of it. You have that sense of, okay, so at least for me, for example, uh, converting to online education was a huge deal in terms of the amount of time and work that it took. But then I didn't have to commute anymore, which actually saved me hours and hours. But so on the other side of that, it seems like it's harder to be intentional about Sabbath when one day just bleeds into the next one, and you can't even remember what day of the week it is anymore. So the intentionality of needing to say, I need to have that day in which I'm not being anxious about all of the things that need to be taken care of, where the boundaries are not even so clear anymore, to be able to maintain that boundary around that and keep that day holy becomes particularly important.
Yeah.
And on the matter of gratitude and resilience, one of the things that has been made clear to me, at least over these last several months, is there are things to be grateful for. That even while things are getting turned upside down, and you're having to do things that you're forced to do that you didn't want to do, there are some good things that are coming out of that, and it pays to take time and notice those, because that helps us to keep our perspective and remember that it really is about God and not about us.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if I could ask a question for clarification, just to help us kind of get a more a clear picture of what it means. But this word resilience is a word that gets used a lot. Todd, as we said, Todd Bolsinger has written a book called Tempered Resilience, and Kurt, you mentioned it. Cameron, you mentioned it. Like, help us understand what that means. What is resilience? Whichever one of you wants to, Kurt, and since you mentioned it first.
Yeah. So I can describe it best by saying the opposite of, which is breaking, not having the ability to snap back easily, to be flexible. My lack of resilience comes out in me just being either anxious internally or just snapping at people around me. It's like, okay, there's something more going on inside of me here. I am just not breathing well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Cameron, do you have any thoughts on how to describe?
Another way to be able to get at that is to put it in the context of kind of the discussions that have been there in the ministry literature and in psychological literature for a long time about stress. Because for so long, the emphasis was on stress and burnout. What are the things that overload a pastor or somebody else, and what are the consequences of burnout? And it's only in the more recent decades that people have been able to say, so what are the things that make people less vulnerable to that in the first place? Instead of just trying to worry about how we get rid of the negative things, how do we build certain positive practices into our lives so that we don't burn out, so that we don't, go underwater? I mean, the two ways of thinking about resilience is, can you stay afloat? And the other is, can you bounce back? Those two things. And so that's kind of where Todd's book and everybody else who's writing about resilience is ending up going is saying, here are some things that you can actually do. Don't worry so much just about the pressure, but here are some things that you can do in order to keep yourself
Yeah.
strong in the face of it.
Yeah, that's good.
J.R. Briggs uses the word or the phrase blasted to kind of describe everything that's not resilience. And blasted is bored, lonely, anxious or afraid, tired, envious, depressed. We've all been blasted,
Yep.
over the past year, because one of those different categories fits us, and all those different categories at different times fits us. And it's been tough.
Yeah. So that leads me to the last question I want to ask you guys, and that's just, how have you been formed over the course of this past year? What has God done to shape you spiritually and just as a person? Cameron, why don't you start?
That's a huge question. I have to say that COVID has been a very personal thing to me. It's not just, an abstract, let's look at the numbers and see how many people have been infected and so on. I mean, it started with, again, being forced into doing things in a way that I had sworn I would never do. While people were talking about online education, I'm like, nah, I'm a classroom guy, never going to do that. And having to do that and the number of hours that it took, I mean, I was working like 60 hours a week trying to put materials together on the fly and so on. But to make it even more personal, doing all of that in the face of, for example, my daughter had to be hospitalized for a couple of months for something, and trying to get back and forth to the hospital when I'm trying to record lectures. And then we did not anticipate this at all. But even my mother contracted COVID and died in the hospital on Christmas Day. So it's been a deeply, deeply personal thing, which is part of why it's so hurtful sometimes to hear the way that people talk about this as if it wasn't really an issue, as if it's not something we need to take seriously. And for me, it's been the development. For me, has been learning again what hope really means in the midst of all of that, and being able to, as Kurt was suggesting earlier, find the things to be grateful for, find the ways in which God is still moving, even in the midst of all of that, and to be able then to take all these other things and keep them in the right perspective.
Yeah, that's good. Kurt, how have you been formed over this past year?
Yeah, there's no doubt that COVID has been a very painful season for all of us. I remember my last flight back from Pasadena to where we live in Colorado now. It was middle of March, and at that point, we didn't know anything about this virus, how it was spread, and it was just absolutely frightening. And it's been frightening for months, hoping for a vaccine and all that. Painful. But my response to how I've been formed spiritually through this is one simple word, and it's Colorado. We moved to Colorado from Southern California almost 2 years ago, and so we've been in Colorado for the year of COVID. What's kept me going is, first of all of our kids, spouses, and grandkids are very close by, within 10 minutes of us, and so they've been part of our COVID bubble. And so just being with them has been amazing. And that's been part of the gratitude side of all this for me, just having them near. And then secondly, because of Colorado, I am outside so much more. It's just a beautiful state, and we live nearby a creek. I tell people I now live at 5,000 feet, and even though I'm at 5,000 feet, I breathe better because there's something inside of me that is just more at peace. I start off every morning hiking on this trail, and that's my time of just praying and singing, sometimes out loud if nobody's around, because that would frighten them. But it's an hour out on the trail every morning, either in good weather or trudging through snow, which is a new experience. But it has lifted my spirits in the midst of all of this craziness.
Yeah, right. It's those spiritual practices or a rule of life, right, that helps us get through. Has helped me certainly, and sounds like you too this past year. And I think as we make the transition back to whatever the future will look like, right? Those practices, anyway, are what are going to keep us grounded and healthy. And anyway, thank you, boy. Really good stuff. And I really appreciate everything that you guys shared today. If folks wanted to find out more about you or the work that you're doing, where can they go? Kurt, why don't you start?
So probably the easiest way would be just Google Kurt Fredrickson, Fuller Seminary, and you'll get to my page and all the good stuff there.
Good. Awesome. And Cameron?
And they could find me the same way. Well, don't look for Kurt Fredrickson if you're looking for me, but just to clarify that. Or they can, if they actually want to get a sense of the way that I think and write and so forth, they could go to my blog. The blog is called Squinting Through Fog, and you can get to it. Just simply remember thefog.blog, and there's information about me there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just mention, I think I was talking to you guys before we started recording, but you guys wrote a book together 7 or 8 years ago, something like that, called That Their Work Might Be a Joy, May Be a Joy.
Right. Will be a
might
joy.
Or may?
Will.
Okay, will be a joy. I was totally off. Okay, That Their Work Will Be a Joy, which I read back when it first came out. Fantastic book, and just about on some of these same topics of spiritual formation and spiritual practices for pastors and spiritual leaders. And anyway, so I just want to kind of put that out there, that's a great resource too. Anyway, thanks guys. I really appreciate this conversation, and I'm grateful for the work that you guys do.
Great. Thank you, Marcus.
Okay, good. That delay. That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, this was good. Let's kind of